Hey everyone, welcome to this latest episode of Binance's AMA series. I'm Ben Rose, General Manager of Binance Australia and New Zealand, and today I'm joined by Leanne Bats, who is the head of Web 3.0 at New Zealand Rugby. So Leanne, lovely to see you again. Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much for having me.
So look, we normally kick things off with a bit of an introduction. So Leanne, give me the fast version on who you are and why New Zealand Rugby has a head of Web3.
Yeah, that's a good point. My background goes back, long history of sport. Used to be a football player myself, actually. So always loved it. We're Kiwis, right? So we don't ever go too far from loving sport. But my background really has always been in the commercial side. I have a background in marketing psychology. I actually started my career in pharmaceuticals. Then followed my passion into sport, working first with FC Barcelona, where for them I actually worked to bring their Scholar program, which was the sort of youth training arm, I guess, in its brand expansion globally. So I actually had the license to run that through Australia, New Zealand, Canada, and China. This is back in like 2015. And as I was doing that, I always thought, man, this is the sort of thing that the All Blacks need to be doing. And, you know, as I learned and grew and, you know, ran that business for them, eventually I picked up the nerve to actually pitch it to Richard Thomas, who is, of course, now my boss. But I said to him, you know, this is something I think you guys should be doing. And he said, you've got great timing because we have begun, but we need some help. Could you come in and help us? So that's how I got under the hood that way. And really, I was actually heavily pregnant at the time. I only have one son, but I was 36 weeks pregnant when I was doing the pitch. So
you say you've only got one son, but that's a pretty. Yeah. I mean, you know, making humans enough.
Yeah. Right? Yeah, exactly. So there's a reason there's only one. But yeah, so I didn't stay on, obviously, to work full time on that role. And so I really just wrote them a plan and then went off to, you know, become a mum. But I did stay in touch with them. So I was always working sort of you know, a contracting role, limited hours per week, and the kind of guise or premise was always to look at what was sort of wild, weird, and interesting, but not really requiring a full-time headcount. And it really kind of always was, you know, digital or you know technology, innovation, that side of things. And as I was doing this, you know, we're going on a few years now. This is sort of, you know, covering applications and other products and all this sort of stuff. Of course, we're right in the throes of COVID, so we're looking at sort of digital innovation. Is really when we're starting to come up to what is, you know, about to be the boom of NFTs, essentially. And I was your classic case of ignoring Bitcoin for a very long time. I had a friend, I remember telling me very distinctly in 2017 all about Bitcoin, and I honestly could not get my head around it. I had no idea. I just sort of was so weird. I didn't get it. I couldn't understand the technology or anything behind it. So I really just parked it to the side and moved on, like a lot of people. But then, of course, I started to get interested in Cryptocurrencies a little bit. I must have seen, I think, a TED talk on it. And I was like, well, this is really interesting, and had a quick, you know, look into it, but never bought anything. But I found that quite fascinating. And then Beeple and the Beeple drop came out, $69 million, which of course hit headlines around the world. Yeah. And then Bored Ape Yacht Club came out, which was really for me the light bulb moment, because I have a background, remember, in marketing and psychology. And I think what Bored Ape did was really threw the rule book out for everything I learned in university and just broke all the rules. You know, they did do some things very, very classically well, including, you know, nailing their target market. And then what we saw from them was really just something that I think, you know, just opened my eyes to, first of all, what I think is a coordination tool, you know, how tokens can actually bring a community together and actually give them a common goal and a common purpose, and they can rally. And I think we can all agree that we saw that. Yeah. Of course, so at the time, you know, New Zealand Rugby wasn't really focusing on this as such a thing. It was all very new for everyone. But during this, what kicked off to be a bull market, you know, we really fielded a lot of inbound proposals, for which I was sort of the go-to girl initially. I was the only one that had sort of gone down this rabbit hole myself. I have my own sustainability startup in Web3. So I'd really taken the time to learn beyond just Ethereum, just NFT communities, into looking at, you know, consensus mechanisms, smart contracts, how they work. So I was pretty well prepared, I guess, to handle and field some of these initial proposals, and then it really turned into, gosh, we really need to start paying attention to the space. Let's go out there.
And just before we get into that and how that looked, we went to our users, to our community, and asked for questions. And one of the questions was, look, New Zealand Rugby is seen as a bastion of tradition. It's it's a sports team. It's guys in blazers. So why in head office is there somebody being told to look at digital innovation? Where does that fit strategically for that organisation?
Yeah, so strategically, the goal is to create, fan engagement. How do we create engagement directly with fans? When you look at, most things in this world today, it's via something else. It's via a third party. And the premise of Web3 is really to actually deepen the connections directly with people. Remove these middlemen and middle players. And I think we're just on a journey like everyone else to do that same sort of thing. I think that when you look at more generally sport, is how do we appeal to the future generations? And this is really what we're seeing, ramp up through COVID, is this digitalization of nearly everything. And how do we appeal to that? And I think, for me, Web3 is a big part of what the future will hold in that sense.
Because rugby historically has had a challenge with maintaining relevance in the face of other sports coming from in from other seas with an increasingly diverse population. So I suppose, what role do you guys see Web3 playing in that?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good question. I think that's the point, right? Like, when you look at Web3, you see opportunities for revenue, no doubt. We've seen sports teams capitalize on that so far, but the other one is, future proofing the future generations and appealing to them. Under the umbrella of Web3, I'm not just talking about NFTs. It's how I got into it, but tokens is one part of it, and then we start to look at what is new realities, augmented reality, and how do you enhance what we're actually already delivering today, and make that relevant and appealing to future generations. And this is, looking at things like the metaverse and how that plays out and what role that has to sport. And I would argue that it's going to be profound. It'll be big, and we need to move with the times, or we end up playing catch up.
Okay, so let's talk about a specific project, and we've got some more questions from our community for you later. But talk to me about the Women's World Cup. What did that look like, and what did you do?
Yeah, I mean, that was a moment, I guess, in women's sport. Following on from what we'd already seen in football. Selling out stadiums, big stadiums. And so the Women's World Cup was something that may never be replicated again, with that feeling. I think the whole country can feel, what happened awesome. Around that. It was. Yeah. It's something you just wish you could bottle, right? So there was this real groundswell, and I think if, there is soon to be content put out, but, following the story through the Black women's journey into that World Cup, it was, it was tough times for them. There was all sorts going on. But they really rallied. And I think, we all felt that. And then the reason to sort of enter Web3 at the same time was really a great story narrative and a great opportunity. And like I said, behind the scenes, I'd been tasked with going off to kind of figure this out, go off to figure this out and go, what shall we do? It was really apparent at that time that big Web2 brands, traditional brands, were entering the space. It was possible and it was doable, but at that time, it was like, you either do it really well or you do it really poorly. And there was really good case studies of both. And while I don't know if there's a playbook still now today, and it really is, down to the individual company and organization and what fits. For me, it really became apparent that the first, the Web3 ethos is about delivering value, not extracting value, right? Like, how can we put value into an ecosystem rather than pull it out and drain it out of it? Yeah. And I think the communities that had already formed there, the smartest thing to seem to be would be like, join one. You don't have to build one. You don't have to go off and do it yourself. You can actually arguably do it better if you actually go in and find out who's already shaped the space. Really learn from them at the ground level. Like, what have they done here? How have they managed to do it? How do they keep this going? What's really behind the hood? And all that stuff. And I think when you're trying to learn, the crazy thing about Web3 is it's all there. You just have to buy a ticket to enter. So it's essentially what we did. And, part was positioning exercise, finding a brand that we aligned well with, and our, ethos and values aligned well with, but also a brand that was positioned well on the market, and then put ourselves there in the right space where we wanted to be and where we wanted to learn. It was part looking at a marketing budget that would otherwise be what would be a sunk cost, but now could actually be played around with. And we actually got IP, and what could we do with that? We haven't done much at all, really, but there's an option there, and there's an exploration there. And then the third and final part was really that it was a learning exercise, and this is not lip service. This is exactly that. It took me 6 months behind the scenes to get the company or an organization ready to buy these assets, these digital assets, because we had to go through things like policy changes, and understand where these would sit once we purchased them, how we would securely hold them, who would be responsible for these moving forward. All these questions, if we ever wanted to create something here, we had to overcome. And the best way to get into do it was not to actually have to build your own, but actually buy someone else's.
So let's go back. So what was the initiative? What did you buy? What did you do with it?
Yeah, that's a good question. So we actually set off out to purchase 33 WOW G NFTs, and these are the second collection from the World of Women collection. And the World of Women collection is really a movement and an organization around sort of diversity and equity, born in Web3 and actually female founded, which was at the time extremely rare, and was really successful because of that. It's sort of like what they call the blue chip project. And the interesting thing is, of course, is that they give you the rights to the IP, and that was important to us because we wanted to see if we could explore with that as we moved forward. So we actually purchased 33. What we had seen before, again, I was looking at playbooks of other brands. There'd been a few that had come in and purchased one really high profile, powerful one, like Visa bought a CryptoPunk, Adidas bought a Bored Ape. We ended up buying 33 WOW Gs. But the number was supposed to be quite significant in the fact that we had 32 players named in the World Cup squad, and it's the only time really we put a cap around the players. It's otherwise a very organic and flowing thing with a squad, right. With numbers coming up and down with injuries and all that sort of stuff. But for the World Cup, 32 are named, and that's it. We went with 33 though to represent. There's 32 players, but there's also one to represent everything else that builds a team, be that the staff and the people that have to put on the World Cup, but also the fans, of course. And the narrative really went that we'll be the first team to go into the World Cup with not only the nation of New Zealand behind us, but the world of women behind us too. And so really what we tapped into was a really thriving online digital community of around 250,000 people that actually supported us through the World Cup, be it from any nation they might have been from, be it that they may never have come across rugby before, and plenty hadn't. They became our fans, and they became our fans for the entire campaign. And it was something special. It was really cool. And certainly within their community, a lot of people had, like I said, never watched a game of rugby, but they tuned in to watch the girls and cheer them on. It was a pretty amazing thing.
There's something quite interesting, isn't there? There's a stat, you'll know this better than me. I think the All Blacks are the most popular second team around the world. Is that right?
That's correct. Yeah. So if they're not the favourite team, they'll be the second favourite team. So somehow we managed to do that even in emerging markets, even like, the likes of England. You'll find that, of course, they support their own team, but their second favourite rugby team would be the All Blacks. So you probably hate and like us at the same time.
Awesome. So you bought the NFTs, and what did you do with them? How did you engage with the community?
Yeah, so the whole thing was, again, it was a bit of experimentation, right? And again, we put this out that we're learning. We're not really. We're kind of going as we're building the plane as we fly it kind of concept with Web3, and we're here to learn. But the idea was that we'd be able to give value to the community. We wanted to add something to them, so they rallied around us in terms of sport, and we delivered back to them, the game that we played, and everything got them to tune in. But the one activation we sort of worked on and did was working with Adidas to release a digital Black Ferns jersey that was then released to the community or anyone holding the token. And they could actually take their PFP and actually show their support publicly by donating the jersey. And we had thousands upon thousands of people do that. My Twitter profile still wears mine today because it was a proud moment. But yeah, so effectively for a couple of weeks during the campaign, actually, I think we must have released it on the semi-finals. So you could wear it for pick it up for that week and really kind of get behind the team. And yeah, there's a lot of people still wearing theirs today. It's very, very cool to see.
And of course they won, right? So no correlation.
They did. Yeah. It was like the fairy tale story, really. So and again, the Discord channel and community was going nuts during that time. That it was
Amazing.
buzzing. And this is, again, a community that really didn't know much about rugby prior to this. So it was really cool and really, really nice to kind of bring it from a whole nother angle, the support for the Black Ferns team.
So one of the questions that we received was about, you've got this new concept of getting into Web3, of buying NFTs, engaging with communities on different channels. What were the steps that you had to go through to sell that into the organization and to make it doable?
Yeah. I mean, again, a lot of research, like I took basically to the internal team going, entrance is key. Entrance can be done well and it can be done poorly. It's usually the poorly comes from really not understanding the space. And so, I just painted the picture of, look, these are case studies of success and these are case studies of failure. And this is how I believe we would fit best into doing this. And at that stage, it really wasn't like, here's a certain project we should buy. It's that I just think participate before you create is my ethos here. I think that's true to an individual as it is to an organization, that often, you learn by doing here. Like the first thing I did in this space when I got into it was get a wallet. Spend, unfortunately, a lot of money at the time because this was when gas fees were high and I didn't know what I was doing. And I bought an
investment. Consider it as an investment in your learning.
It's a tuition, right? It is a tuition. It's not quite so treacherous today as it was back then. But I bought this I don't even know what it was, but then I joined the community, on Discord, and just learned and absorbed like a sponge. And effectively, that's exactly what I recommended. New Zealand Rugby did too. And we have, this is exactly what we did. Well, to a certain extent, not obviously everyone's doing the Discord or anything like that, but but you learn by doing, and you learn by having to go through it. And again, I didn't want our first entrance to be us releasing something and feeling like we're pulling value, going after money, and the finances come first. It's very important that I think you show Web3 that you get the space, you get the change of mindset and the shift in the ethos here.
But I would imagine there'd be some fairly gnarly operational challenges, right? So how do you value a digital asset? Where do you custody it?
That's exactly it.
Who does it? Who has access? All that sort of thing.
Exactly. And this is exactly why it took 6 months. But precisely why you can't really be doing that as you're trying to release your own tokens. You really need to figure these things out as an organization. And we even had a policy, for example, that wouldn't allow us to purchase anything in cryptocurrency. Which meant we had to use our partner MoonPay to do the whole purchase. We couldn't even do it ourselves. We had to find another partner to do and make that possible, which was actually a whole lot easier because they really do help, and you kind of just have to be quite normal about it, and they do all the kind of more technical side. But it did mean that we had to get digital wallet. It did mean we had to get a multi-sig, understand who was sitting on that multi-sig. It was a lot of stuff to figure out. And then, as this was seen as an investment, if this is an investment, like, are we even allowed to do this? So, it had to require sign off from all sorts of levels. And it certainly wasn't easy. It nearly came apart a few times behind the scenes, of course. And all we're talking about is buying NFTs. So, again, really in the kind of technicality of what you might try and achieve as an organization in Web3, this is just the first step and just dipping a toe. But a really interesting way to dip a toe, and I would argue quite risk-free, in that if we put it out there and got major backlash or anything like that, okay, well, that tells us that we're not doing the right thing. But it was received really positively around the world, and I opened up many doors for us to talk to the entire ecosystem of Web3. So it was a very good start, I would say.
Okay, so one of the questions we had from this was from Mark was both international sports teams and Web3 have reputations for having a big carbon footprint. So are New Zealand Rugby considering sustainability as an important part of their venture into Web3? And if the answer is yes, what's the plan?
Yeah, 100%. Of course it is. And this is something that we really were careful about at the very beginning. It's possibly why we didn't jump in immediately. Back before Ethereum moved to proof of stake, there was a huge consideration for not participating. Okay, and so the timing again felt really right around the World Cup because we were in a phase of proof of stake gone. As I mentioned, I'm passionate about Web3 sustainability. I have my own startup in this space, and so that was a consideration that I took right from the beginning. And I think when we look forward to what we want to build, I have a great solution for them, which is actually using the smart contract to remove carbon, not just once, but in perpetuity. So you actually have the ability to create planet positive digital goods here, things that actually will improve the situation rather than just neutralize or be very low carbon. And I think it's important, to use technology for what it's actually purely designed to do, not just speculative assets or fun game gimmicks, that kind of thing. But, when you look at what's possible behind the scenes and with the technology, you actually can create things that are infinitely good for this planet.
I happen to agree with you, but might be a bit tired.
Yeah, exactly.
Another question we had, and this was from Tanya, was what ways are you guys planning on bringing the fans along the Web3 journey?
Yeah, and this is fascinating because we haven't quite yet figured everything out, right? As in, we are still building the strategy. Really, there is just me as n=1 behind the scenes, so it does take its time, of course. But yeah. I think it's obvious where this space is heading, and that really comes down to the word co-creation. And community is a buzzword that's thrown around in Web3 often, but actually, and I used to kind of balk at it at the beginning, going, we're talking about community when we're looking at the very earliest use cases of NFTs, and that was really about pumping floor prices up. That's what the community was used for. But when you look at, I think, Web3 and the kind of where we're heading to now is that is the capital. Like, it's not the revenue, it's actually the human IP, all these things, that the social kind of capital behind this is really the important part. And I think when we look at where we want to go with Web3, it's instead of building things for our fans, how do we build with our fans? Because we're talking about a future, and that co-creation is hugely powerful, because you basically can build things with your advocates rather than build and hope that they really like it. It's that you can actually bring them in right from the beginning and do it with them. And I think there's some good examples in the space of that happening. Whether it be DAOs, where you basically come in and it's a common goal that you're trying to achieve. Linked DAO, there's cases in sport, Linked DAO, that just managed to acquire their first golf club recently. It's all coordination, all built together, and actually all agreed, and off they go. There's another example in basketball with Kraus House, who are actually they have a goal to go out and buy an NBA team, and they've just been I think shortlisted for the Phoenix Suns.
Amazing.
There's some crazy things happening. Nike, of course, are building their virtual studio called .Swish, where they're allowing anyone in to become basically a creative director. They can come in and actually co-create future digital sneakers or physical sneakers. And we roughly want to do the same. We want to explore beyond rugby. But I wouldn't say that we want to go off and do it and then release it and then go, hey, do you like this? It'd be about how can we bring fans along for that journey into what is hopefully the future of sport and where we want to go, and beyond rugby per se.
So, but if you look at other sporting teams around the world, who's doing this really well? I mean, obviously, Cristiano Ronaldo did a really good job with Binance.
You stole my example.
Yeah. Sorry about that. But, what teams are nailing this in your view?
Yeah, honestly, I think outside of traditional sports is nailing it best. As in, they're the ones that have come at this kind of creatively, and possibly because they've got a blank slate, right? When you've the IP in our world is tied up, and it's been tied up for many years in many different ways, and that's not easy to kind of unwind and figure out how we can get through this. But traditional sport has really seen NBA do it really well, and they've really just gone to traditional sport. They've taken their current content, slapped it on a new medium of technology, and sold it, and they were the first to experiment and did it really well. What hasn't been so creative is everyone that kind of followed suit and dropped 2.0 of top shots in their own own environment.
Yeah.
And I don't necessarily think that's a long term. Great, people will want that, no doubt. But when you look at the future generations, they're not likely to be into that. And so I don't necessarily think it's a great long-term play. But the Australian Open, I think, is a great example of getting creative and using actually the technology, the digital good actually, related to an actual spot or, a coordinate on the court, and they tied it all together. What will be difficult for them is how do you long-term that? How does that happen in 10 years' time? And that's their challenge now, but I think they led the world and did a very good job of that.
That was a very Kiwi compliment to an Aussie. You said they did an
Yeah.
awesome job. However, what's coming next?
Well, I mean, I love Ridley, who leads the team, is a very good friend of mine. You know, he's the kind of guy that I could talk to about anything and bounce ideas off. You know, and be the first to say, like, we've got to figure this out for 10 years, not just one year after the other. And that is the tricky thing when you lead the world, is like, there's no playbook. He's got to be the first to create it and understand where to go to from there. So it's really hard, and I don't envy that task necessarily, but I think he's done a fantastic job so far. And the other ones are
sorry, go.
No, I was going to say the only other examples aren't really traditional sport, but Sail GP's doing an amazing job again. They've created their own DAO to create their own team. You know, and I think they're just also bringing in technology around it. Of course, then we've got fan tokens, which I think are probably being far too speculative to this point and far too liquid, but you can see where that will go, and it's very interesting. So there's a lot going on. I think no one's kind of nailed it yet.
And you're talking about some of your, you know, local relationships. What surprised you about the Web3 community, both in New Zealand and Australia, as you kind of got deeper into this?
Yeah, I mean, I've become very engaged with the Australian ecosystem recently, and it's really thriving. It's quite cool actually to be part of that. And New Zealand is like classic New Zealand. It's a lot quieter, but not because we're not building. It's just quieter because we're just Kiwis, and we get head down, tail up, and off we go, and we sort of don't stop to talk about it until we've launched something world changing. But you know, one can't go past New Zealand without shouting out to the Futureverse crew, who are doing amazing things, and that's work. You know, from particularly Aaron McDonald, but he's been in the space for a very long time, and I think he was learning heavily in 2017. So when this came around, he knew how to capitalize on it. He knew what to do. And you can see it. You know, you can see what they've managed to do and what they're building with an open metaverse is very exciting. Anything open, I think, is the future. That's the whole point. It's what we must strive for. You know, clearly Binance is committed down here with, you know, the setup of you guys. So there's some really cool things happening. We've got the Callaghan Institute, who's just opened up or pushed, you know, the Web3 community portal down here. And it's, again, we're just sort of seeing it start to ramp up in New Zealand. But we've got some crazy good people who I don't even know personally, but I'm now aware that they've come out of New Zealand. But one of the founders of the ENS domain naming service, he's out of Christchurch. Fire Rides DAO, which is a very kind of covert operation, but really, really interesting stuff, sort of leading the kind of thinking around decentralization. Also got New Zealand representation on that. So yeah, there's a lot. There's nearly too much to mention, but I think classic New Zealand ways is that, you know, we don't necessarily talk about it before we're actually leading the world in it. So
I think we can probably do it in Australia. You're seeing that difference in Australia?
Yeah, Aussies are much better at getting up and sharing and being part of a community and the in crowd and all the rest of it. And they put on conferences, and it's a sheer thing with numbers. You know, we just don't have the same volume here. I mean, your road shows are really gathering people together, and I think it is growing, right? It is there, but you go to Australia and you know, things are just much bigger, and so that's what stuff does.
Right? Yeah, I mean, I think what Australia is doing well, which we could learn from over here. I think, you know, some of the NFT conventions, you know, the CryptoCon, some of those events really bring the community together with, you know, for a focal point. I think that's something, you know, be good to see.
And the networking. Networking opportunities are huge. You know, there's nothing quite like it. Just on Monday, I was in Melbourne for a conference that was really focused around Web 2, looking at Web 3, and we had presentations from the likes of Reddit, you know, Carrefour, the, you know, European supermarket brand, you know, really kind of everyday brands that have done amazing things in Web 3 and actually, you know, showing the world how it can be kind of rolled out. And that was a very different vibe to, say, an NFT conference where it's, you know, much more our own sort of echo chamber. But that was a fascinating conference and quite a different crowd. And again, I think, they're leading the way with putting those kinds of events on. And it's much harder in New Zealand because we're so small. But, you know, it is a fantastic thing to be involved in and look at those sorts of things. And yeah, the networking opportunities are huge.
Awesome. Hey, Leanne, I think that brings us to the end of our conversation today. This has been really, really interesting. Thank you so much for
You're most
spending
welcome.
time to chat with us. Look, I know everyone here has gained quite a bit of insight on what New Zealand Rugby is doing and how Web3 is kind of playing a role in that. So thank you for that. To all of our viewers, look, tell us what you thought in the comments. Really keen to know if there's someone you'd love us to talk to next. Obviously, don't forget to like and subscribe. Follow us on our social channels, now including Twitter in New Zealand, and look forward to more AMAs coming soon. Thanks, guys.